As someone who has made a yearly tradition of reviewing COD betas and has played nearly 1,000 hours since 2022, I think I'm qualified to say that the last 2 years have been equal parts rough and weird for Call of Duty, a franchise that is now seemingly always playing catch-up. MW2, the long-awaited follow-up to the second most important COD ever, was easily the most controversial release since Infinite Warfare, the peak of the enhanced mobility era, ironically for going in the polar opposite direction. Then, as if things couldn't get any worse, Warzone 2.0, which I personally enjoyed. Do you see this guy? Does he not know that I see him?
Let's go.
Proved to be even more polarizing, putting COD's freshly minted Golden Goose in jeopardy. What ensued for the following year was a slow but steady march to roll back the changes made and transform what they had into something that more closely resembled the Warzone 1 era. It all culminated in MW3, which broke franchise tradition by essentially being year 2 of MW2, a large balance patch and content infusion, but for the price of a full game. The walls cracked when Infinity Ward's vision for the future of the franchise was firmly rejected by the player base, but if you ask me, I think the walls themselves have been slowly closing in even before that. In 2024, COD exists in a class of 1. It's the only big traditional mainstream shooter package left now. Battlefield, which is 1 foot in the grave, has shifted to multiplayer only and will go with some sort of freemium model next time around, and the last Halo game, which could very well be the last Halo game, sold its campaign for $60, but spun off the multiplayer as a free-to-play live service abomination. COD is still a retail price game with a campaign, a multiplayer, and other modes like zombies. At the same time, new maps and weapons drop throughout the year, they have a battle pass and expensive cosmetics, and Warzone is like a second parallel game that is free to play. That's a lot of weight to carry and a lot of different audiences to serve, especially on a yearly basis, all while having to compete with much more lean and stable forever games like Fortnite and Apex Legends, which function like ever-growing platforms. Whether it's content, quality, or release schedule, something's got to give, and that's become readily apparent. For many fans, though, this year's COD is something of a light at the end of the tunnel. The Black Ops sub-franchise is a beloved brand unto itself, and while Treyarch have played a supporting role having a hand in MW3 Zombies, among other things, due to behind-the-scenes drama messing up the 3-developer cycle, this is their first full release since Cold War 4 years ago. By far, the longest gestation period a COD game has ever had, and also their first usage of the next-generation engine. The unprecedented absence, combined with many fans' growing disapproval with Infinity Ward's stewardship of the franchise, has placed a rather large spotlight on Black Ops 6. Change is in the air, so let's talk about it.
Hostile scout post in your AO. Taking Bravo underway.
Shut.
The stiff, floaty, and impactless feel of the old COD engine combined with balancing that went for twitchy movement and high time to kill is what has come to define Black Ops gameplay for me. In fact, when MW3 introduced a 150 HP time to kill last year, I described it as Black Ops balancing. In an ironic twist, the two sub-franchises have changed places this year. Black Ops 6 goes back to 100 HP with a faster time to kill than MW3 and much faster time to kill than Cold War, which felt like playing a fighting game. The new engine combined with the faster TTK leads to really solid gunplay, further aided by marginally higher recoil, great weapon models and animations, and much better sound design than last year. But all of that is ancillary compared to the main gameplay feature this year, Omni Movement. This has all the hallmarks of something I would despise and categorize as over-the-top Twitch streamer esports montage pandering, especially after MW3 went all in on that angle, advertising slide canceling as the headliner feature. However, I think this might actually be the most creative and well-executed gameplay innovation the franchise has seen since COD 4.
Fire. They got our HCC.
It feels like hardcore Henry, like first-person John Wick, as if you're inhabiting the body of a very agile person. Essentially, it gives you a lot more range of movement and granularity in how you go about what you already wanted to do, taking off any restrictions. For example, in previous COD games, going prone would limit your ability to aim, but here you're able to look around 360 degrees, and the character model realistically rolls around to reflect that. You can run, sprint, slide, or dolphin dive in any direction, including backwards, and the whole time you're doing these actions, you're able to aim freely. Despite how crazy it is on paper, this system is nowhere near as extreme as I imagined it to be. I will say that it takes a bit of a mental recalibration on mouse and keyboard, where at first I had to think about what I wanted to do before doing it. I'd imagine it meshes much better with controller where you're rotating a single stick rather than pressing 4 buttons, but regardless, the way it's implemented is very logical. In fact, I would go as far as to say that this game is more natural and less hyper than MW3. It's hard to say which game is faster, but MW3 feels faster because its implementation of fast movement is basically breaking the game and turning the ground into a hockey rink. Black Ops 6 is a much more manageable game because its movements are readable. Omni movement is paired with a robust first and third person animation set, which provides a sense of physicality and segmentation between each state of movement. Unlike MW3's slide canceling, which effectively gave every player a thruster pack, Omni movement has a high skill ceiling, yet it doesn't dominate the game. If you go out of your way to use it constantly for no reason, you'll actually end up worse off than if you just played normally, which I think is a good thing. But it also allows for just as many moments that weren't possible before, both for offensive and defensive maneuvers. There's other small additions here that deserve a mention as well. When you aim near cover, you automatically lean, which is nice and maybe should just replace mounting, which never seems to get used. Then there's this year's gimmick feature, where instead of an execution, you can take an enemy as a body shield. As far as random COD gimmick features go, it's a good one, not disruptive or pointless, it's like a fun little treat. The core gameplay here is fantastic, and I commend them on making this engine their own. While they all share the same backbone, it does not feel identical to playing MW2 or 3. It feels like a new game.
Taking Bravo underway.
Black Ops always tries to innovate with the create a class system, often in ways that I find to be excessive. This time around, I think it's pretty reasonable while still having that extra bit of flavor that fans love. The gunsmith system, which is a series staple at this point, returns, though it is far more simple than MW2 and 3. While some guns still share optics, this mostly does away with the convoluted unlock system we've had for the past 2 years, dramatically cutting back on the amount of attachments in the game, opting for more of an old-school route where every gun has its own generic suppressor, for example. One interesting thing I found is that tac stance, which debuted in MW3 last year, returns, but to use it, you need a laser attachment. Tac stance ended up being super fun on some builds in Warzone, but if it's going to work like this, it kind of feels like it might as well not be in the game. You also have a knife, which can be equipped by holding down the melee button. It makes logical sense and gives a nice movement speed buff when you need it, like Counter-Strike, but could potentially be annoying in the wrong hands. The perk system is where most of the flavor comes in. You pick 3 perks, standard stuff, but each perk falls into one of 3 specializations, and having all perks be from the same specialization gives you a bonus. For example, going with all the red aggro perks nets you a bonus that gives you faster health regen and movement after a kill. Then, to add on top of that, wildcards are back, allowing for an extra perk, an extra primary, or 3 extra attachments on your primary. All in all, it's a refreshingly simple system, and while none of this feels game-changing, even in this beta, I felt like I was able to pick stuff that catered to my playstyle rather than just ignoring the system. I do have to admit that I have never been and continue to not be a fan of the score streak system. Thankfully, it does reset on respawn this time, unlike Cold War, but for me and the way I play, it's just an added layer of confusion, and I end up working harder for a streak than if it were just straight-up kill streaks. The streaks themselves are quite expensive and also kind of weak, likely because of the scoring system, which goes with the participation trophy style of eliminations, where sneezing on someone counts as kill credit, which I'm also not a fan of.
Bingo! That's a hostile target eliminated.
Anecdotally, I've seen a lot of people respond negatively to the maps. It seems to be people's main complaint about the beta. For me, these were some of the most enjoyable new COD maps in recent memory, but like a lot of other choices in this game, they don't quite adhere to Black Ops convention. They biased towards smaller maps, which is exactly what I want out of 6v6 COD, and they also have these strike maps, which are even smaller, designed for the 2v2 game mode or very hectic 6v6, similar to Shipment or Rust. Despite the blog post describing the core 6v6 maps as tried and true 3-lane design, I found these maps to be surprisingly diverse and cleverly designed. A map like Scud looks big and open, and while it does offer long sightlines and conventional lanes, the overall footprint is actually quite small, and they've cleverly blended in cover points that make it possible to traverse the middle even if a sniper is trying to hard scope the lanes. On the flip side of that, a map like Derelict appears to be too small, ripe for bottlenecks and frustrating spawns, yet most of the matches I played on it flowed freely, and there was plenty of space for longer range playstyles. Then you get a map like Babylon, which almost plays like a Halo map. Rewind was a huge standout for me. It's formatted like a believable location, as well as being rendered in a beautifully stark manner, while still having good gameplay flow. The front parking area and rear loading area serve as big outdoor lanes with little alleyways connecting them, and then there's 3 clusters of indoor spaces, which are all arranged in a more realistic way rather than looking like a paintball arena. It's simultaneously a simple and complex map, and while I'd imagine sweaty competitive players would hate this one, I found it to be incredibly fun and unique, possibly one of my favorite new maps in the modern COD era. All of these maps also felt like they could accommodate most playstyles and weapon ranges, without allowing any of them to be obnoxiously dominant. The strike maps were more of a mixed bag. The 2v2 mode feels less head-on than MW19's, and more like a miniature R6 Siege match. These maps are kind of stressful to play on, either because you can't see anything or because you can be seen so easily. I can tell you I'm never going to play this mode again, but it's there if you want it. What's far more interesting is playing 6v6 on these maps. It's definitely not a disaster like Vanguard's attempt at one-map-fits-all player counts, but so far it's 50-50 on the maps available from this beta. The mineshaft level was a lot of fun and actually less mindless than Shipment due to its relative complexity, incorporating narrow lanes with cover and some verticality. Gala, though, was easily the worst piece of content in this beta. It's less of a map and more of an oversized basketball court, with the only defensible position being the tower in the middle, which has a sight line of basically everything. It's pretty hard to get up there, but once someone good does, it's a real problem to get them out, let alone multiple. Not sure what they were thinking with this one, it's so obviously bad. Score streaks are disabled on these maps, so it's pure close quarters gunplay, meat grinder action, but they're quarantined to their own playlist, so you never have to see them if you don't want to. Compared to, again, Vanguard or other attempts from years past to incorporate larger player count modes similar to Battlefield, I think this is minimally disruptive to 6v6. It's not dragging down the core experience or taking a lot of resources away from it. If you've walked away from COD for the past few years, which I wouldn't blame you for doing, this is shaping up to be the year to hop back in. This is the most cohesive COD game since MW19. It's well made, and unlike the past 2 games, it doesn't feel like classic 6v6 was a complete afterthought. There's 16 maps at launch, a ton of weapons, the core gameplay fundamentals are solid as hell, which you can't always take for granted these days, and are further enhanced not only by Omni movement, but also a bunch of small flourishes that demonstrate a degree of care was put into this. Things that I didn't even mention, like more hit zones on character models paired with reactive death animations, and an extremely customizable HUD. There's only 2 things I don't like here. As I mentioned, the score streak and scoring system, which is a matter of preference and admittedly part of the Black Ops identity, and then the issue of aesthetics. Every COD for the past decade has eventually devolved into a neon-soaked fever dream once it's been saturated with months of increasingly fantastical microtransaction cosmetics. But in this game, it's not just here on day 1, it was actually here on day -30. I'm not asking for this to be a milsim, but it is supposed to be a period piece. The base content faithfully adheres to that, but when I see zombie robots and weapon skins with electrified barnacles on them, why even bother going to the effort of creating a Desert Storm era game in the first place? That aside though, I enjoyed what I played, and I respect the choices they made. As someone who has never been the biggest fan of Black Ops, I feel like they really dialed back the trademark zaniness here, while still having a lot of fun stuff that you definitely wouldn't see in an Infinity Ward game, and bringing a compelling all-new core gameplay feature to the table. After the past 2 years, it's the shot in the arm the franchise needs.